Hi, I'm Mike Label for BizNews.com. On the 24th of February, Ukraine's territorial integrity was violated when Russian troops crossed the internationally acknowledged Ukrainian border, making a bid for the capital Kyiv in a multi-pronged attack the Kremlin called a, quote, special military operation aimed at denazifying and demilitarizing the Ukrainian state. Russia has blamed the West and NATO for encroaching ever further west as a threat to the Russian Federation. 4 areas of Ukraine are under occupation by Russian troops: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. From the 23rd until the 27th of September, voting took place in referendums that'll essentially see these 4 areas becoming part of Russia, if that is the way the voting goes. Many believe it's a bit of a foregone conclusion. Now, a structure of this country's governing party, the ANC Youth League, is in Crimea and in Zaporizhzhia and other occupied territories, overseeing the voting as election observers. Ukraine, the UN, US, EU, NATO-aligned countries consider these referendums illegitimate, illegal, and a sham. My guest, Steven Gruzd, is the head of the Russia-Africa project at the South African Institute of International Affairs. Steven, thank you for your time. Were you taken by surprise when it came out that ANC Youth League members are election observers? Stranger than fiction.
Absolutely, Michael. Thank you very much. Yes, I was surprised. One would think that there are enough problems at home that need the attention of the ruling party. And I haven't actually seen any comment from the ANC itself on what the Youth League has been doing. But yes, I have seen some of the videos where they're talking about this is a democratic process, this is a transparent election, this is people legitimately expressing their desires. And I think them going there gives a veneer of legitimacy to something which has no legitimacy at all. The ANC Youth League is famous for grandstanding, and I think they've outdone themselves on this trip.
Now, last time we spoke, which was round about the end of February, just after the initial invasion, my question to you was, what is South Africa's official position on the conflict? Perhaps it's a good idea to just revisit that question.
So if you ask the South African government today, they will say we are non-aligned, we are strategically non-aligned, we are neutral, we are for peace, we are for negotiations, and we are for the end of the war, but we don't come down on the side of one or other of the belligerents. But that's a bit difficult to maintain, particularly since in March, President Ramaphosa quite openly said this is NATO encroaching on Russia's sphere of influence, and this is a war that NATO brought upon themselves. We also saw the visit of Thandi Modise, the Minister of Defense, to Moscow for a defense conference right in the middle of the war, and she wasn't afraid to say, where South Africa stood on that, and the implication was that it's neutral, but it's leaning towards Russia. I mean, in the West, they've taken the view that if you're not against them, you are for them in some way. And South Africa has tried very hard to maintain its independence and the ability to put across its own foreign policy and have its own foreign policy priorities and not be dictated to by one or other side. But, I think it's probably fair to say that it is neutral but leaning towards Russia. Another example of that was in April when President Ramaphosa spoke to President Putin and then took weeks and weeks and weeks to speak to President Zelensky. So I think South Africa may have had some notion that it could play a mediatory role in this conference, but I don't think it was ever serious about that, and certainly doesn't have the means and the material and the resources to put behind a serious bid to stop the conflict.
Now, in South Africa, we have political parties who vocally support Russia, the EFF, clearly the ANC Youth League. The ANC has close and historic ties with, then Soviet Russia, and that relationship has continued into contemporary Russian Federation era. Should political formations be free to associate with whom or whatever they please, Or are the optics in this particular instance, where the mother body, the ANC, and by extension then the South African government, do the optics look bad here?
Well, it all depends, optics are in the eye of the beholder, and it depends which audience one is playing for. So I think, if we're a democracy, we have to allow free speech, and we have to allow parties to do as they wish. We've had John Steenhuisen travel to Ukraine to show support for the Kiev regime. We've now had the ANC Youth League, and certainly senior ANC figures have traveled to Russia over the last 6 or 7 months to show where they lie. This one, again, I think it is, if we are advocates of free speech, it's got to be free speech for everyone. And on this particular issue, the world is very polarized. I mean, we saw a similar referendum in Crimea in 2014. It's happening under the barrel of a gun. It has very few impartial observers, and those that have gone as observers, such as the ANC Youth League, are quite clearly not impartial. So can a true referendum take place under those conditions? We've also seen millions, hundreds of thousands and millions of Ukrainians uprooted from where they live, so they won't be able to vote. How transparent will the counting be? And I think everybody expects there to be a result that these particular areas would like to join the Russian Federation. But there's also been mixed messages from Russia, because at the beginning they were recognized, Luhansk and Donetsk were recognized as independent countries. And now it seems like they are going to want to annex them, and then they can claim, if Ukraine attacks those areas, that they are attacking sovereign Russian territory. So it's complicated.
So I'd like to just take us down the ANC Youth League rabbit hole for a second. ANC Youth League member Kulekani Mondli, he is there as an election observer, and he says in one of these videos, and if you'll bear with me, I just want to quote it in full. He says, quote, "Kudos to the Russian Federation for granting them, the people in those areas, this opportunity to express themselves. As young people of South Africa, as Africans, we believe in democracy, and we are ambassadors of democracy. We believe in self-determination. The people here are so jovial and free. The security is amazing. The voting process is very transparent and very legitimate. Everyone who is for democracy should support this referendum. We are saying to the Russian people, you are not alone, as we fight for self-determination, and we are demanding a multipolar world. We are not going to be forcefully led by the West," close quote. What do you make of those comments?
Well, they're quite Orwellian, where nothing is but what is not, and words are used to denote the very opposite of what they're intended to. I mean, to say that democracy is flourishing is really to negate the very real suffering that we have seen in eastern Ukraine. In the areas that have been liberated by the Ukrainian forces, we've seen a lot of evidence of torture, of mass rape, of defilement of bodies, of absolute destruction of buildings, and just wanton violence. It seems like that particular representative has gone through Alice's rabbit hole and come out in this utopia, and it's anything but. There is such trauma in Ukraine. Many of those that have left the country as refugees have been women and children, because men have been conscripted into the Ukrainian army. And so you've had this traumatic separation of families. You've had this destruction of lives and livelihoods, thousands of people killed, also on the Russian side. I think to kind of talk as he was, that this is a blissful utopia, is naivety in the extreme.
Now, the DA's Shadow Minister for International Relations, Darren Bergman, issued a statement on Tuesday asking perhaps the most obvious question here, a very important one. Who paid for this trip? Either the Russians paid, in which case you can question the neutrality of the election observer, or the ANC paid, in which case you can question why they're not paying their own staff members, yet they have money to send youngsters over to a war zone. Or the South African taxpayer paid, and that is a host of problems on its own. Do you agree with Mr. Bergman? The issue of who paid for this is going to emerge as very critical.
Absolutely, and I think his three alternatives are really the only possibility. Either the Russians paid, the ANC paid, or you and I paid as taxpayers. I think this one will probably appeal to the DA to make a big spectacle out of, I think to make political capital out of, and absolutely you have a ruling party that can't pay the salaries of its staff. We have elections coming up in the ANC towards the end of the year, and there's been a lot of positioning of candidates, and of course our national elections are only 2 years away, and we know a bankrupt political party, perhaps that won't be too fussy about where funding comes for a nice trip to Europe, all expenses paid. If it's you and I that are paying, I think we should have something to say about it.
Lastly, your status as an election observer, what comes with that? Do you need to be neutral? Do you need to have some experience in, or something that sets one up to be qualified as an election observer? Why should young members of the ANC Youth League, and I'm not being ageist here, but why would they be chosen to be counted amongst election observers? Are the Russians scraping the barrel here?
I think there are no international laws on electoral observance. So it has become custom over time for countries to send groups, delegations of respected people from their country to other countries to make sure that things are being done in a fit and proper way, that people are able to exercise the vote fairly, that there's no intimidation, that there's no ballot stuffing, etc., etc. So you don't really need a qualification. You don't really need, one would hope you've had some training, and one would hope that you're objective to call it like it is. But, I think this particular these referenda have been carefully stage managed. They have been controlled by the Russian military. And I think this particular delegation knew what it was going to see before it saw it, and knew what it was going to say before it saw it. So it does seem a little odd. I mean, maybe this is where the ANC is able to get that the Russians are able to get support from, and maybe this is a long-term investment for them.
I suppose it's also problematic in that none of the media reports from South Africa, the so-called Western media, is carrying this. It's not available to anybody. It's only being carried on Russian state media.
Well, you have to think about that. You have to draw your own conclusions. That no independent media were covering this, and Russians are old hands at influencing elections, both at home and abroad.
Steven Gruzd, thank you for your time. And just for the record, BizNews did reach out to the ANC Youth League's National Task Team spokesperson seeking comment, but to no avail. Thanks for your time, Steven.
Thank you.